Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to the Department of Justice Budget Worksheet Completion webinar. My name is Christina, and I will be your moderator for today. Our presenters today are Angela Wade and Suhaila Lasky from the Department of Justice. We also have a number of panelists with us today, including Julius Dupree and Dara Schulman from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, Jeroma Boyd from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and Melissa Harrington from the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services. Starting the webinar today will be our first presenter, Angela Wade. Go ahead, Angela.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for everyone for joining us today. This afternoon, we are going to go through the CTAS budget completion process. Now, the Department of Justice has a budget detail workbook designed just for CTAS. It combines the budget detail worksheet along with your budget narrative into a single document. Now, you are only required to submit one workbook. Although you're only required to submit one workbook, there may be multiple worksheets depending on the number of purpose areas that you are requesting funding for. Now, the budget detail worksheet is where you will provide a detailed computation for each budget line item or budget category where you are requesting funding for. The one good thing about this budget workbook, it is very user-friendly. So once you enter in your information in the detail, all your totals will be calculated out for you. Now, in addition to the budget detail, you must provide a budget narrative that clearly describes each category of expenses that you have listed in the detail. The narrative should also explain how all the costs will be estimated and how they are relevant to a particular program or purpose area that you're applying funding for. So this here is just a list of some of the information and supporting documents in relation to CTAS as you're going through the application process. This is also the website address where you can find these items. That is www.justice.gov/tribal/. In addition to a copy of the current CTAS solicitation, you will also have a sample budget detail workbook and narrative that includes instructions on how to complete the actual budget detail workbook. Now, for the Department of Justice, when you're completing your budget, we're using the following categories. The first category is personnel, followed by fringe benefits, travel, equipment, supplies, subawards and procurement, other, and indirect. There's one category you did not see here. There's the construction category. Generally, construction is an unallowable expense, but we do allow for renovations in that category. And there is one purpose area that does allow for expenses to be put in that category. So let's jump right into each individual category. The first category we have is the personnel category. When you're completing your budget detail for the personnel category, what we're looking for is the positions or titles that you are hiring for. If you have the name of those individuals, you can list the name as well. If you don't, that's perfectly okay. You want to show us the annual salary or their rate of pay, the percentage of time they're going to actually be working or performing work on your particular program. And also, if your organization currently pays cost of living increases, you want to make sure you include that in this category as well. So this slide here just shows an example of what the detail section will look like in the personnel category. You can see the name and the position, the salary, the rate of the salary. In this particular example here, it's an annual salary, the amount of time they're going to be working on a grant program, the percentage of time, and then the total cost column. You can see how the workbook calculates out the total cost here. Suhaila, do you have anything you would like to add to the personnel category?
Yeah, thanks. So this is just a reminder for OVW applicants to please make sure that your narrative has a corresponding description for each of the staff who are listed in this section. So we try to think about, like when we have these presentations, what can we help mitigate as much as possible, any back and forth, through the budget review process. And one thing that we see a lot is that there's maybe somebody who has a missing narrative who was listed in the budget. So it's just a reminder to go through and double check and make sure each person listed here has a corresponding narrative.
And just to add on to that, with your narrative, not just for personnel and all your budget categories, you always want to make sure that your narrative talks about what's going on with a particular program or how these funds are going to help your particular program and have an explanation that support your calculations. So the next category is the fringe benefits category. The first thing I want to say about fringe benefits is you should only be paying fringe benefits for those individuals that you have listed in the personnel category. So fringe benefits are generally based on actual known costs, or they could be based on a percentage. So fringe benefits is usually your FICA, your health insurance, any retirement you may be paying out for your employees, or workers' compensation. So in this example here of the budget detail, we generally like to see a breakdown of each fringe benefit category that you're paying fringe benefits for. So in this example here, you have a separate line item for FICA, workman's comp, retirement, and health insurance. So please show us some type of breakdown when you're listing out your fringe benefits. And as always, you need to include a narrative to support your calculations and explain how you came up with your particular fringe benefit cost or rate. So the next category is the travel category. The first thing we're looking for in the travel category, we'd like to know what your organization's policy is for travel. If you do not have your own policy, you need to follow the federal policy for travel. So we want to know who's going to be traveling, the purpose of their travel. We want to know what the policy is, the per diem rate. We want to know how much you're paying for transportation, that is any airfare, train, taxi, shuttle service, any other costs such as parking and tolls. If you're using airline transportation, you always want to make sure that you include baggage fees. That's one item we usually see that's forgotten about when we're looking at your budget. If you have local travel is generally your taxis. If you're using a shuttle bus, if you're using your own personal vehicle, you need to list that under local travel, and also tell us what your organization's policy is for local travel. One thing also I want to say about the travel category, a lot of the purpose areas has designated conferences or events or trainings that you must attend, so you want to make sure that you are reading the solicitation for your particular purpose area to see the requirements for travel. And also, travel is the one category I always say is the best category to try to build in flexibility to in your budget. And I say that because you're applying for funding for CTAS now. Your travel might not occur until maybe a year later. And as we all know, airfare prices change, gas prices fluctuate. So you want to make sure you have some kind of flexibility when you're completing this category in case those prices do change. A lot of times, you may not even know where you're traveling to just yet. I generally recommend that if you need to guesstimate, and that's what we usually call your budget is your best guesstimation. When you're estimating your travel location, pick a location that's furthest from where you live. So generally, I usually recommend, let's say if you're on the West Coast, when you're estimating these costs and you don't know where you're going, pick a location on the East Coast as you're estimating your costs for travel. So this slide here just shows another example of what the detail may look like. It has a line item for local travel. Local travel, if you're driving your own car, you will have mileage costs. For regular travel, the second line item, actually the second, third, and fourth line item is mandated travel. It has a location listed. If you don't know the location, it is perfectly acceptable to put to be determined in this space. Then you want to list the type of expense. So you need to show a separate line item for airfare, lodging, and per diem. For airfare example, it would be whether it's one way or round trip. You want to tell us the number of individuals who are going to be traveling, and then the total cost will calculate out. If you are including lodging, you always want to make sure, in addition to your lodging per diem, that you include hotel taxes. That's perfectly acceptable to add in the hotel taxes. Suhaila, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, thanks. So this is just for OVW applicants in Purpose Area 5. There's a requirement to allocate $30,000 for your staff to attend mandated trainings that's listed in the solicitation. So in the budget, you don't have to break down all of the costs for this requirement. Instead, you just need to put like the title where Angie has this listed at right here. So under the on the left column, you would just say OVW mandated training, and then the total would just be $30,000. And in the narrative, you can state that this line item is for the required allocation of $30,000 for OVW sponsored training. But that just goes for this mandated training. And every other training, you want to make sure that you break it down. And if you're including local travel or regional training, something that's not OVW sponsored, then that you can still include. It would just be in addition to the 30,000 for the mandated requirement that we have. And you also need to include a narrative for those other types of training and travel events, just so that you can support what activities you are what activities that supports.
Thank you, Suella. One thing I want you to be mindful of for all OJP sponsored events that have 30 or more attendees or participants, they could be federal or non-federal. Any of those attendees or participants that require lodging costs cannot exceed the federal per diem rate for lodging. Conferences that include less than 30 people are exempt from this requirement. Generally, when OJP is hosting an event, a large event, OJP or the organization hosting it will go ahead and have a room block that will include the federal government per diem rate. So be mindful of that. This is just the website that will dictate to you the federal policy. It's at www.gsa.gov. If you need any additional information in regards to DOJ's travel policy, then you can always consult the DOJ Grant Financial Guide. The next category is the equipment category. What you will be including in the equipment category are non-expendable items that are being purchased. Basically, you want to know what your organization's policy is for capitalizing equipment. And as always, if you do not have your own policy, then you must follow the federal policy. So for equipment, we're looking for the cost and what you are purchasing for the equipment category, and how this equipment is basically going to support your grant programs. Now, the federal policy for capitalizing equipment is a useful life of more than 1 year with a fair market value of $5,000 or more. Under the federal policy, if you have purchased equipment and you no longer need that equipment for criminal justice purposes, there are one or two things you can do. If the fair market value was less than $5,000, then you are able to keep that equipment with no further obligation back to the federal government or the awarding agency. Under that same guideline, if you purchase equipment under the federal policy, if the fair market value is $5,000 or more, the equipment can either be retained or sold. However, if you do sell that equipment, any proceeds must be returned back to the federal government or the awarding agency. Suhaila?
Thanks. So for OVW applicants, computing devices can be considered supply items if the cost of the item is less than your capitalization threshold. So go ahead and check with your finance staff, with your tribe, what your capitalization threshold is. And if the cost of the computer or laptop is below that threshold, then you can place that in the supply category, not the equipment category. Also, if you're requesting to purchase a vehicle, you can include the cost in this category, but you'll also need to include a lease versus purchase analysis for any purchase or lease of a large ticket item. And so we say that during this presentation here because a lot of times it's something that we have to go back and get additional clarification from the grantee or from the applicant. You can include it either as an attachment to the application package or in the narrative in the budget, but the analysis, it should include quotes for both a lease and a purchase of comparable vehicles, and an analysis that demonstrates that the option that you selected is the most cost-effective measure taken. Also, just remember that in the cost analysis for a lease, you can include all of the other kinds of costs that you would incur for a lease, like any mileage overage fees or wear and tear to the vehicle. Like if you have any of those other types of things that you know that you're going to incur because you are on a very rural area and you know that there's going to be a significant amount of wear and tear, you can include those types of fees as well in the analysis, because sometimes it might look like the lease is a cheaper option than purchasing a vehicle, but when you take everything into consideration, that it might not be cheaper to lease it. So you just have to look at all those different aspects of it. Also, if you do determine that the lease is the more cost-effective measure, then you would include that in the cost for the vehicle. You'd include it in the subawards and contracts category because you're leasing it and not purchasing it. So it's not the equipment item, it's a contract. So it's just some things to keep in mind. Thanks.
Thank you, Suella. So in the equipment category, you need to list out the equipment you're actually purchasing, the number of pieces of equipment you're purchasing, and the actual cost. And then as always, you want to include your narrative of what you're purchasing, the cost of them, how this equipment is going to support your grant program, and you need to let us know also in the narrative what your organization's policy is for capitalization of this equipment. So the next category is supplies category. So the supplies category are expendable items. Those items, they'll basically be expendable within 1 year. Also in the supplies category will be those pieces of equipment that fell under your capitalization threshold. So for the supplies category, you need to provide us an estimation on your cost for supplies, how your supplies are going to support your particular grant program, and also you need to include a detailed explanation in your budget on how they're going to support your program. So in the detail, you want to give us a list of the supply items you're requesting and the cost, and again, the budget workbook will calculate out those costs. And in a narrative, you want to include a detailed description on what you're purchasing and how it's going to support your particular grant program, how you came up with those actual costs as well. So Haley, did you have anything you would like to add to the supplies category?
Yeah, thanks. So for our OVW applicants, this is just a note about the different types of supply costs that we see a lot in budgets or in our Purpose Area 5 budgets. So it's a reminder to separate out the different line items that sometimes we see clumped up into one. So for example, you would have a different line item for general office supplies, from the program supplies, outreach supplies, healing circle, and group support supplies. So each of those would be their own line item rather than just one giant cost for supplies. So in the budget, you'd have them each listed separately and a narrative to include examples of the types of costs that are included in each of those line items and a breakdown of the cost and a description that supports the need or the activity that it supports. So for example, if you have program supplies as a line item, then you might include, that you are planning to purchase brochures and posters or mailers that go out, to the community. So those, you would just include examples for that line item, and each of them would be listed out separately. Thank you.
Thank you, Suela. Next category is the construction category. Now, generally, new construction is considered an unallowable cost, but we do allow for renovations and expansions, and generally, there's one purpose area that does allow for these costs. That would be purpose area 4. So make sure that you do read your solicitation and that you're in contact with your program manager before you actually budget any items into this particular category. So you want to list out what you're renovating, or I believe, and the program speakers correct me if I'm wrong, you are allowed to purchase prefabricated facilities as well in Purpose Area 4. So for this area, you want to list out what you're purchasing, how much it costs, and how is this particular project is going to support your particular grant program. And as always, you want to show us your calculations for anything you're budgeting in this particular category and include a narrative explaining exactly what you're doing, how much you're spending, and how it's going to support your particular program. So the next category is subawards, subgrants / procurement contracts. Now, subawards are those funding that you're passing down to other organizations to carry out program activities. So for subawards, you want to provide a description of any of the federal award activities that you're proposing to be carried out by a particular recipient and an estimate of how much you're actually passing down or the cost is going to take for them to carry out these functions. For procurement contracts, you want to provide a description of the product or service that you're procuring using a contract, an estimate of the cost. You want to make sure that you're following your own organization's procurement policy. If not, you do need to follow the federal policy. If you're using an individual consultant, be mindful of the $650 per day threshold. Now, that threshold does not mean that you can't not pay somebody more than $650 a day for an 8-hour day. That is just a threshold. You should be paying a consultant for what they're worth. If you do need to pay someone more than that $650 for an 8-hour day threshold, then you will need to get prior approval and submit a justification as to why you need to pay them more than that. If you're using a sole source that's over $250,000, then you need to get prior approval for using that sole source and, again, submit a justification for that as well. So in the subawards procurement contract detail, in the subaward section, you're going to list out all the subawards you're passing through, the amount of money you're passing down. Then there's another line item for consultants, individual consultants. You want to list that out as well, along with any expenditures that go along with that. Again, with your detail, you need to include a narrative. The narrative should support what this contract or subaward, the work they're going to be performing on your particular program, the amount you're passing down or amount you're paying for a particular contract, again, and how long they're actually going to be working on your particular program. Zayla, did you have anything you wanted to add to this particular category?
Yes, thanks. So just a note on costs that we see with our OVW applicant budgets. If you're including speaker or trainer fees, make sure that you're including the estimated cost for the speaker or trainer and the total time that they'll work for the engagement. So that we can make sure that it's within the threshold that Angela was just talking about. And again, just to reiterate, all consultant rates should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, consistent with fair market value, and equal to rates that that individual consultant has provided for similar services in the marketplace. And so just if the rate exceeds 81.25, that you'll need to come in for prior approval. But that reminder again, the 81.25 per hour or $650 for an 8-hour day, there isn't any sort of like federal rate, that's just a threshold that once you exceed, you'll need to obtain prior approval. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next category is the other category. The items you will put in the other category would be things like utility, telephone service, maybe rent. You want to list out the items you're including in this category and include a basis here as well. So in the calculation, you want to provide a description or list out each item, the cost, and again, the workbook will calculate out the cost. In a narrative, you're going to explain how these items are going to support the grant program and include an explanation on how you came up with the cost that you are including in this particular category. Suhaila, did you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, so for our OVW applicants in Purpose Area 5, my comment here is similar to what I described for supplies, and when you're making sure that each of the different types of items that have that you list here, that they have their individual line item and corresponding narrative. So for example, if you're providing transportation assistance, transitional housing assistance, and emergency assistance for victims, that each of these should have their own line item and narrative to support how you estimated the cost and the activity that the cost supports. So it wouldn't just be one giant line item that says, like victim assistance. You would have them separated out by grouping more or less, so that we can determine if the cost is reasonable, and if there are certain things that are in there that aren't allowable. So some examples of unallowable, so not allowable costs, would be security deposits that are returned to the person who's in the unit. So you need to make sure that security deposits, that there's a process that they are returned to the program, so that they're returned to your office and not to the person who's in the unit. Other things are any sort of minor renovations or repairs that require like installation in the walls, or anything that's really more than just like hanging a nail in the wall to like hang a picture or something. That's not anything more than that is not allowable. You wouldn't be able to support costs for changing a door knob or the lock on the door. You can pay to have a locksmith come and rekey it, but you wouldn't be able to pay for the actual doorknob to be changed. So there are some things that are unallowable, and that's why we require additional detail in the narrative for the different types of assistance that you're providing, so that we can try to mitigate it in the beginning, make sure that nothing's included in the budget that's not allowable, and then so that that you're not 2 years into the project and expending costs that for items that are not allowable. So we just need some of that detail in the budget so we can identify it early on. Thank you.
Thank you, Suella. The next category is the indirect cost category. If you have an approved indirect cost rate agreement by your cognizant federal agency, then you may be able to include indirect costs in your budget. Now, if your indirect cost rate agreement is current, you want to make sure you attach a copy of your current and approved indirect cost agreement to your budget application. And also, let's say you had an indirect cost rate agreement, it has recently expired, but you are in negotiations to get it active again. You can still include indirect costs in this category. However, those funds will be put on hold until you're able to submit your actually approved and active indirect cost rate agreement. So you need to be able to show us that you are currently in negotiations to update your agreement. If you never had an approved indirect cost rate agreement from a federal cognizant agency, then you may be able to elect to use the de minimis rate, which is up to 10% of modified total direct cost. If you are eligible and do elect to use the de minimis rate, you need to let us know in writing of your eligibility and election to use it. We do have a form that you can use. It's not a required form, but it's a recommended form that you use, letting us know that you are eligible and electing to use the de minimis rate. Now, there are several types of rates that DOJ currently uses, or to include the provisional rate, final, predetermined, fixed. So basically, one thing I want to point out, I forgot to mention, is with the de minimis rate, if you are electing to use the de minimis rate can be used indefinitely, but you just need to make sure you're consistently as how you're charging costs, either going to be direct or indirect. You can't alternate between awards. One award, you're charging something as direct. The next award, you're charging something as indirect. You need to be consistent on how you're using that de minimis rate. So in the detail for indirect costs, you're going to tell us who your federal cognizant agency is. If you do have indirect cost rate agreement, you're going to let us know the base of your rate. You need to let us know your actual rate percentage. And in the narrative, again, you're going to state out who your federal cognizant agency is, your rate, the expiration date of your particular rate, and the basis of your rate, be it direct salaries, fringe benefits, modified total direct costs, etc. And you're going to attach a copy of your current indirect cost rate agreement. If you're using a de minimis rate, again, you're going to provide that information in the description, what your base is, the rate you're using. For the de minimis rate, you can use up to 10%. And it, again, include a narrative about the de minimis rate and submit something in writing letting us know your eligibility for the de minimis rate. Now, in addition to your budget detail and your budget narrative, the budget detail workbook will automatically compile a budget summary for every single budget category you're requesting funding for, with every single purpose area that you're requesting funding for as well. So if you see in this example here, it has a list of every single purpose area that's included in the CTAS solicitation budget, and with a line item from each budget category. So this way you can get an eyeball view of everything you're requesting. One thing I want to point out, that if you do see an error in your budget summary, you want to go back to the actual worksheet tab where you entered in the detailed information and make the correction there. Again, I also want to point out that with this budget detail workbook, the very first tab has detailed instructions on how to actually complete the budget detail workbook. So if you have any issues or questions, you can always refer back to that tab. Let's see what else. And as always, just be mindful to read your solicitation to make sure there are specific guidelines for particular budget categories for that particular purpose area, and make sure you're looking for in the solicitation for any unallowable costs that may be listed. So a few reasons why budgets do not clear, and I think Will already mentioned a couple of them. You want to make sure that you do read your solicitation when you're completing the budget. Always say follow the checklist to make sure you go down the checklist, make sure you haven't missed anything. I always recommend that you find someone else in your organization that's not connected to the financial part or the budget part to kind of glance over your budget just to make sure nothing looks out of whack to them. Again, read your solicitation. I already mentioned, make sure you look for anything that may be listed as unallowable in the solicitation. You always have to complete a budget narrative, so your budget narrative should support what you have in your detail. If you are requesting indirect costs, you want to make sure you attach a copy of your negotiated and approved indirect cost rate agreement. And at this time, we're going to open the floor up for questions.
Great. Thank you, Angela and Suhaila. The first question is on the budget form for purpose area number 1. The narrative boxes will not open. When clicking on the radio box to add the narrative, an error message pops up and it directs me to go to the narrative line. However, nothing will open that narrative box so that I can enter information. This problem does not occur on the purpose area number 4 tab. Also, the travel section in purpose area number 1 is set up differently than in purpose area number 4. Any advice?
Hello, this is Melissa Harrington. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your question, and that was actually some points that I wanted to raise if we didn't have that question. For Purpose Area 1 applicants, thank you for your interest. And yes, we did make some changes to our budget worksheet this year. You will just continue to enable your Excel budget worksheet just like that you normally do. However, for a couple of the sections of the budget worksheet, specifically the equipment, the travel, the supplies, and the other cost sections, and I think that's one of the sections you mentioned, the travel one. Those 4 sections, we actually grayed out the bigger narrative box, and that's why you're not able to enter anything in it, because we would rather you actually enter your information at the smaller box, which is right above that, which is called the item narrative description or line item narrative description. So you're going to just do everything that you normally do in terms of providing a detailed item description, the who, the what, the why, the cost, the quantity, etc. But you're also going to provide your justification, how your requested items will provide success for your project, and basically your budget justification. But those bigger narrative boxes are grayed out, so you can put all of your information in that one line item narrative box, which is right above that. So you should have the ability to enter, and if you continue to get stuck, you're welcome to email us at tribalgrants@doj.gov for further questions. But that is the reason. You're blocked from entering information in those 4 bigger boxes, but you can put your information in the above line item narrative box. And I believe that you have like 2,000 characters, so there'll be plenty of room, but we just wanted to do that. The other sections like personnel, indirect costs, the other narrative boxes are not grayed out. So I hope that helps.
Great, thank you, Melissa. And another question is regarding purpose area number 4. And on the purpose area number 4 tab, there are 2 sections labeled travel. One is under procurement contracts. So when you go in to add the narrative for the procurement contracts, it is then placed under the second travel section. Any advice?
This is Dara Schulman from BJA. The first section for travel, which is actually the travel budget category, that should be for grantee, the applicant's staff only. There's a second travel section under procurement because that would be for if you're having a contractor or consultant, their travel. That's where you would want to itemize that out if it's not a part of if it's itemized rather than part of the full contract or the general rate.
Great, thank you, Dara. And for a 5-year project, is it okay to have one line item? We would plan to break it down in the narrative, but just use one line item saying yearly amount times 5 years and not break it down by first year, second year, third year, etc. Is that okay?
For Purpose Area 1 applicants, we really do need you to break it down. If you are applying for hiring, we do offer 5-year grants for hiring and 3-year grants for equipment and training. But we really do need the 5-year breakdown for entry-level salaries and benefits for Purpose Area 1 applicants.
And I think I speak for at least, I think, Purpose Area 4, possibly Purpose Area 2 and 3. I think breaking down by year for salary in Fringe is important. But if you're talking about like a one-time contract or a purchase, then you would not, if you're entering, say, I'm going to use Purpose Area 4, a one-time contract for architectural design, you do not have to break that down by year, or if it's construction by year, it could be just one cost for the contract. Thank you.
For Purpose Area 5, Purpose Area 5, we don't have 5-year programs, so I imagine that question isn't necessarily for us. However, if it is, then I would say that it depends on what the cost is, but generally, if you have something that goes on for 3 years or whatever the case is, you can generally put it into one line item, and then you would include a narrative description in the narrative section. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. For Fringe, our tribe has a standard rate in use. Instead of breaking that down by FICA, medical in the line item section, we have historically through CTAS broken that down in the narrative. Will this be acceptable this year?
That's acceptable for Purpose Area 5.
Angela, did you have additional information to add?
I was going to say that's generally acceptable as long as they break it down, at least break it down in the narrative. That's usually fine for us when we're reviewing budgets.
Great, thank you. For the Purpose Area 1 budget worksheet under the travel section, the lodging note says, account for shared rooms, but the budget worksheet wants us to include the number of staff, and it acts as a multiplier for all of the types of expenses listed. I'm not sure how to budget for shared rooms without cutting the lodging expense in half because it's multiplied by at least 2 staff. Should I cut the expense in half or just budget for 2 rooms?
Yep, that's a great question. I would just budget for 2. For Purpose Area 1 applicants, you are required to attend the new awardee orientation. So we would like you to budget for at least 2 representatives to attend, typically a 3-day meeting. And we use Washington, D.C. as the location. So you can use GSA website to calculate your costs. But yes, I would account for, I think it's better to overestimate than underestimate. So please don't do the shared cost note and just budget for 2 people and all of the costs related to 2 representatives attending the required training.
Excellent. Thank you, Melissa. And we have another question regarding the OVW CTAS award or CTAS proposal, and that is the set travel amount for OVW always leads to an award delay and budget revision during the award process when the budget people want us to break down the travel costs. It makes it really difficult to use the federal per diem rate and total to give to OVW. It would be nice if OVW doesn't put a set amount and just require meetings in the other program area. Any advice?
So in 2018, we actually stopped requiring for all of those to be broken down. So all you need to do for this application is put the line item OVW mandated training and the total of $30,000. So you don't have to break it down with like per diem and lodging and everything. So just OVW mandated training, $30,000. And we'll know that that is your set aside for that requirement from the solicitation. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. The supplies category included light refreshments. Is this still allowable for presentations or for workshops?
So this is Suhaila for Purpose Area 5 OVW applicants. Food and beverage is generally not an allowable cost. However, for OVW applications, if you are including the cost of food or beverage, so just like a light refreshment or meal, for when you are directly serving victims, it is allowable only in that context. So if you have a healing circle or a support group and you want to provide, like coffee and a snack or some bottled water, like a light, healthy snack, then that's okay because it's directly serving the victims. However, if you are hosting an outreach event or a meeting or conference, food and beverage is not allowable in those circumstances. So only when you're directly serving your victims. And that's why I give the examples of like a healing circle or victim assistance or support groups. Those are usually easy to navigate those types of activities where you're directly serving victims. Thank you.
And this is Jerome Boyd from OJJDP. I would just add that for Purpose Area 8 and 9, when you're working with youth and you're serving youth, if it's a youth prevention program or anything relative to working with youth and projects with youth, you can budget for food as it's required for maybe off-site type work, or you're going to areas where food is not available. So we do allow for food for those purposes.
This is Dara Schulman from BJA. For Purpose Areas 2, 3, and 4, generally food and beverage costs are not allowed. If for some reason you can think of an exception, please contact us directly, but for the most part, do not include that in your budget.
And for Purpose Area 1 applicants, that's also an unallowable request.
Great, thank you everyone. The next question is regarding the Purpose Area 1 budget sheet, and that is the Purpose Area 1 budget sheet is different from all of the other areas shown on the webinar. Are there separate instructions for Purpose Area 1 or for us to call for questions?
You can always call the response center at 1-800-421-6770 or email us at travelgrants@usdoj.gov. And if you do have a particular Purpose Area 1 budget question, you can always refer to Ann Beeman or myself. But as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, the only thing or items that are different compared to the other purpose areas is that we grade out 4 bigger narrative boxes in our Purpose Area 1 budget worksheet. Other than that, you will just continue to do what you normally do in the past, except you'll put all of your information in the smaller narrative box above the equipment, travel, supplies, and other cost categories. But it's pretty much the same. And I'm sorry, the only other change would be the fact that this year Purpose Area 1 is allowing a 5-year grant period for the hiring of officers. So that will also look a little different compared to others. And again, you would just fill that out based for 5 years. But yes, if you have any questions on filling out and enabling the budget worksheet, you can always call our response center at 1-800-421-6770 and ask to speak to a Purpose Area 1 contact, who would be Ann Beeman or myself.
Great, thank you, Melissa. And for overtime for personnel who are not listed in the personnel section, would this type of overtime go into the other section?
Yes, for Purpose Area 1, we would like you to put your overtime costs in the other cost section. And please refer to our CTAS solicitation or our FAQs, but we do have caps on overtime requests. Specifically for Purpose Area 1, if you have a sworn force of less than 10 officers, your maximum is $25,000 that you can request in overtime costs. If you have a sworn force of 10 less than 20 officers, your maximum amount that you can request is $50,000 in overtime. And if you have a sworn force of 20 or more, you may request a maximum of $75,000 in overtime costs. And the stipulation is that these officers are engaged in community policing, but you are welcome to submit overtime, and you should put it in the other cost section of the budget worksheet.
Great, thank you, Melissa. And the next question is regarding the indirect cost rate agreement. And that is, to whom do we send our new indirect cost rate agreements as they are approved each year?
That's great that you have an updated one. And if you are applying this year for CTAS 2020, I would recommend you just upload it in GMS when you apply. And depending on which award that you did receive, for example, if you received the COPS award, you would contact again the response center at 1-800-421-6770, and you will be directed to your tribal state grant program specialist, and he or she can receive your updated IDC rate and keep it on file. For example, if you received a COPS award from us last year, but you had an expired rate, your IDC costs would have been frozen until you gave us the updated agreement. So if you send it to your GMS grants person, then they would unfreeze your costs. But I would assume for all offices, you would just contact your awarding agency and follow up by sending your updated IDC to the appropriate contact, and or you can upload the attachment in your submitted application.
For Purpose Area 5 OVW applicants, the process for us is very similar. Just send it to your program specialist. If your budget hasn't been approved, so if let's say you submitted your application, you're awarded, your budget hasn't been approved yet, and then you get contacted by the financial analyst during the budget review, they'll just ask you for a copy of the most current indirect cost rate agreement if it's expired by that point. So just you can provide it at that point to them or send it to your program specialist if it's during the award period. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And the next question is regarding Purpose Area 3. Is there a location where we can find a list of allowable and unallowable costs for Purpose Area number 3?
Sorry, Christina, can you just kind of give us a minute here to discuss that, and I'll get right back to you?
You bet.
Okay.
And as we're waiting, there is another question that's asking if solicitation will allow for fees for a third-party grant writer.
Hi, this is Dara Schulman from BJA, so I can probably answer both of those questions for you. For the first question regarding the allowable and unallowable costs for Purpose Area 3, for the most part, the activities and activities funded through that program are listed in the solicitation and the FAQs. If you have specific questions, please contact us, and we can, let you know whether or not specific activities would be allowable or unallowable if you're uncertain. In terms of for the grant writer, no, grant funds cannot be used to solicit additional funding.
Regarding the grant writer funding for OVW Purpose Area 5, the same goes with us. Funds cannot pay for grant writing. Thank you.
The same for Purpose Area 1.
And for Purpose Area 8 and 9 as well. I think it's pretty much across the board, but I don't want to speak for everyone.
Great, thank you, everyone. And is there a location to find for all the Purpose Area allowable and unallowable costs?
Well, for purpose area 1, we actually have a specific list. It's pretty long, but you're welcome to review it. And as Dara mentioned, also within the solicitation, there is also a general description of activities that one could apply for in each of the purpose areas. But we do have purpose area 1, a specific standalone document. If you go to the Tribal Justice website as well as our COPS homepage, you'll see it. But in general, the solicitation does provide a good overview of the allowable items that one could apply for.
And this is Julius Dupree with the Bureau of Justice Assistance. The same holds true for Purpose Area 4. You can just go to solicitation and it'll really be clearly stated, which I think the big thing is there's no new construction, so that's definitely not allowable. But I mean, as far as renovation activities, expansion activities, fabrication, or prefab, and then permanent modular, those are allowable. No temporary modulars. That's not allowable. It has to be permanent modular if you're going the modular route. But the solicitation should have the information and also the FAQs for Purpose Area 4 as well.
For Purpose Area 5, you can refer to the solicitation for the costs that are unallowable, allowable, and the scope of the projects that will be supported. Thank you.
Great, thank you, everyone. The next question is regarding assurances and certifications. Are the assurances and certifications electronically approved in GMS instead of signing a hard copy?
Yes, I believe that it's done electronically.
Great, thank you. And for purpose area number 1, if we are applying for vehicles under that purpose area, can the make, model, and year of the vehicle be stated within the item narrative?
Sure, we would love for you to be as specific as possible. Great, please do.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is, we are requesting funds for a lot of training for our officers this year, and the narrative for our travel is very long. Will you be able to view the narrative even though it goes well below the bottom of the narrative box?
Yes, you should have sufficient amount of space to provide your travel information. Hopefully, our 8-page narrative limit could also help you as well. If you want to attach an additional page, you could try to do that as well. I would try to fill in your travel information and be as succinct as possible in the narrative box. And also you do have the narrative to address. I think we only have 6 questions, so hopefully that could help you. And if you do have enough page, if you're still within the page limit, if you wanted to upload an additional attachment and just clearly explain that this is additional information for your requested travel. Or you could, again, just be as specific and succinct as possible. And as long as you do a good job of providing a decent travel description, the who, the what, the why, etc. If your application goes through our budget review, our team will contact you for additional information. So in case you don't think you have enough, we'll contact you and get that. So if you can try to work within the space limitations, but if not, hopefully you did I'm sure you will do a good job of describing it. If we need more information, we'll contact you during our budget review.
Excellent, thank you, Melissa. The next question is regarding purpose area number 9. And purpose area 9 requires MOUs or MOAs. For the purpose of the budget, is this the same as a subaward or a contract?
No, this is Roma Boyd. A memorandum of understanding or agreement is separate from your subaward intentions that you budget for. It's an agreement that you have with the entity that plans to provide services or activities for the youth program.
Great, thank you. And the next question is also regarding purpose area number 9. And the question is, we would like to hire a full-time coordinator for a program under purpose area 9 and try the program for 3 years to see if it's going to be successful. Are we required to budget for the full 5 years, since that length of time does not provide enough annual funds to support this full-time coordinator?
That's a good question. We do understand the 5-year time frame is lengthy and may get complicated with the budget and salaries. So your first year is a planning year anyway, where you're generally working on your strategic plan. So it is okay to budget salaries for the 3-year time frame or 4-year time frame that you may need for implementation, and having that first year as a planning year. We say budget for what you need and how you would really view the program as far as implementation, but it is a 5-year grant. Just make sure that even if you only are budgeting 3 years for a coordinator, then we will still want to know how the other 2 years you're going to have implementation or planning. So we're going to be looking at the total project and what your proposal is. So hopefully that helps.
Great, thank you. And the next question is for Purpose Area 1. And for Purpose Area 1, for new uniforms, does each piece of the uniform need a separate line item? For example, one line item for hats, another one for slacks, another one for boots? Or can we do one line item for a new uniform in general?
Yes, please. Go ahead and submit one line item and just itemize what that line item is. As you just said, the boots, the pants, the shirt, etc. You can just do one line item of the complete set of what makes up a uniform, and then include the quantity for each of those, and a description. But yes, I mean, either way, you can itemize it by doing, 10 shirts with one line and then one line item with a complete set of a uniform. Either way is fine, as long as you can just itemize it and spell it out for us of your request. But either way is fine. There should be plenty of room.
Great, thank you, Melissa. And for the Department of Justice required training amount, for the travel training for all of the purpose areas, can this be done as one line item if applying for more than one purpose area?
No, for travel budgeting, you are going to still need to break it down by lodging, per diem, airfare, mileage, that sort of thing. We will actually need to see that as the individual breakdown by line for the amount for whatever training you're attending.
Great, thank you, Dara. And the next question is, I'm confused on the holding of indirect while awaiting the updated agreement, but is that the only money that is held, or is all funding held? It made us start 6 months late on a grant last year.
For Purpose Area 5, the only amount that would be held after the budget is approved, and let's say, for example, the rate is expired and a current rate is not available at the time that we approve the budget, then the only funds that would be held are the indirect costs. So then once you do get the approved indirect cost rate agreement, send it over to us as soon as possible so that we can release that hold on the indirect costs.
And for Purpose Area 1, I apologize for any confusion if I gave it to you earlier. The only cost that we would freeze is your indirect costs. If you were awarded a Purpose Area 1 award last year, but you had an expired IDC agreement, we would have only froze your IDC costs, but you would have been allowed to continue to expend non-IDC costs. So your grant wouldn't have been on hold. It's just you wouldn't have been reimbursed for your IDC costs. But that's the only thing that we would freeze from our standpoint for Purpose Area 1.
And I believe that is the same for the BJA, OVC, and OJJDP awards as well.
Great, thank you, everyone. And as a follow-up, if the indirect cost rate increases over the grant's lifetime, then what do we do?
For Purpose Area 1, you would contact our DOJ Response Center and to speak to your state grants management specialist. Again, that number is 1-800-421-6770. But in particular for Purpose Area 1 folks, I believe that if your IDC rate increases, if we awarded you a certain amount, that's it. We don't increase your IDC amount. But again, I would recommend contacting your grants management specialist in the event that your IDC cost or your agreement is higher now. But I believe for us, we honor the current rate. And if it comes in higher, you can't increase your awarded cost.
For the BJA awards, if it does come in higher, you can submit a budget modification grant adjustment. You will actually need to submit, if you're changing the amount being charged to indirect by any amount, up or down, you would actually need to submit a budget modification, what we call a grant adjustment, GAN, in GMS. You would work directly with your program manager on that information. If your indirect cost rate goes down in particular, you actually must submit a GAN because you're no longer allowed to charge that higher rate. If it goes up, you're not required to charge the higher amount, but you are allowed to. You can submit a GAN to adjust the amount for indirect.
Specifically for Purpose Area 5, OVW applicants, or you would be a grantee in that case, that you would be moving those funds around. But if you do have a higher or lower rate and your budget has already been approved, you do not need to come in for a budget modification GAN. You would just need to refer to the other three things that would, other three changes, like 10% movement of funds, if you're moving money into an unapproved category, or if you're changing the scope of your award. But again, that's for the life of your grant if you're awarded. So if you have any questions about, changes that you're making, we encourage you to contact our help desk or work with your program specialist at that time.
Great, thank you everyone. And for Purpose Area number 5, are you able to direct us to the list of allowable and unallowable costs again?
What I referenced earlier was the solicitation. As far as I know, there is not a list of allowable and unallowable, like a separate list, but I will check with the program specialist with CTAS for OVW Purpose Area 5 to see if there is a specific list, and if there is, then I'll send it to Christina to distribute. But as far as I know, there isn't a separate list, but if I do find out that there is one, then I'll give that to Christina to distribute at a later time.
Excellent, thank you, Suhaila. And there's a follow-up question regarding the grant writer. And for the grant writer, they're referencing a fee for grant writing for just this grant only. Is this allowed?
Federal funds cannot be used to solicit additional federal funds. So if that grant writer is literally going to write another grant or write an application, write this particular application, the answer is no. You cannot use federal funds for that purpose. If you're talking about a grant writer who's then going to sort of be the grant manager, that's a different story. But to actually write and solicit funds, whether it be federal funds or other funding opportunities with nonprofits, federal funds cannot be used to solicit other funds. I'm sort of saying it's not just federal funds, it's other funds. So a grant, to actually write grants, grant applications, the answer would be no. If that person is then going to take over reporting or something like that, that would be actually the personnel on the grant, but not actually writing a grant.
That was really good clarification. The same goes for Purpose Area 5, and I'm pretty sure based off of the feedback from earlier, it was across the board, but thank you for that additional clarification.
Thank you, everyone. And for Purpose Area number 3, can you answer whether or not there is flexibility to apply for a 3-year or 4-year project instead of 5 years?
Yes, this is Julius from BJA. Yes, you can apply for 3 years, but we do give you up to 5 years, but it is okay to apply for less than 5 years.
Great, thank you, Julius. And for Purpose Area number 1, just for some additional clarification on the budget information in the box in Purpose Area 1, I can only see the bottom part when I'm working on it, and when I leave that box, only a part of the explanation is showing. The rest is hidden below the bottom of the box. Can you see what appears to be hidden when you review?
Yes, we will be able to see it. And if you want, feel free to take a screenshot of what you see, and you can email at tribalgrants. Let me just get the email address. tribalgrants@usdoj.gov, and you could just reference this webinar. Just attention it to me, Melissa Harrington, and I will take a look at that. But yes, we would be able to still see all of your information in that budget worksheet.
Excellent. Thank you, Melissa. Our next question is actually for Purpose Area 1. Are police vehicle fuel costs allowable under this purpose area?
No, it's not. We don't fund gas.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. And for travel and lodging, is the limit for 2 trainings or conferences?
Please review the solicitation because each of the purpose areas have different training requirements. So I would refer you to each of the purpose areas that you're asking about and review the training information, because I think it varies across purpose areas.
Thank you, Melissa. We were awarded a CTAS grant for Purpose Area 9 in 2013, and we do not have this funding now. Should we be applying as a new applicant?
For Purpose Area 9, there are 2 categories this year. And if you look at the solicitation, it will specifically tell you which category is for continuation grants and what is for new grants. If you don't currently have an active a PA9 award, it sounds like you would be applying as a new grantee. So please take a look at the solicitation for the specifics on that so you can make sure you're under the right category. But PA9 does have 2 categories this year.
Great, thank you. And as a grant writer for our tribe, it does not appear that CTAS would pay for me to attend the last CTAS orientation. Is it possible in any CTAS purpose areas for me to attend a CTAS orientation in the upcoming year?
Generally, for the CTAS orientation, we are expecting a programmatic and a financial point of contact to attend. So if the awarding agency is designating the grant writer to be the programmatic and or financial point of contact, that's up to the awarding person or the awarding entity. But in general speaking, we invite programmatic and financial points of contact who would be administering and executing the grant.
Great, thank you, Melissa. And if you only apply for 3 of the 5 years of the grant, do you have to wait for the 5 years to be over to then reapply?
I think it depends on the purpose area. So at least for the BJA awards, if you complete your project in less time, typically say like purpose area 2 where you've completed your strategic plan, or purpose area 4 where you've completed the renovation of your project, or say if you applied for purpose area 3 and your goal was really only to set up a new computer system, something that wouldn't necessarily take 5 years, you will have the ability to close out your award early, and that would, I think, would mean you would not have an active award. However, I will also say that those 3 purpose areas don't have a yearly restriction, so I'll leave that for other purpose areas to answer the ones that do have that restriction.
Great, thank you, Dara. And it looks like we do have another question. Are we penalized if we don't send each year's current approved indirect cost rate agreement to our grant manager if that changes during the course of the award? And to add a little information, clarification information, although we always expend multi-year grant funds with the correct indirect cost rate agreement for each year, if it changes slightly, are we penalized if we don't send each year's current approved agreement to our grant manager?
For purpose area 5, you would not be penalized, but I believe that the other offices have might have different clarification on that. So I'll reiterate, for OVW grantees, that would not be the case. A new indirect cost rate agreement that's different from the one that you submitted with your approved budget. That is not one of the changes that trigger a budget modification GAN to be submitted. There are other changes that do require a budget mod GAN to be submitted, but changing your indirect cost rate agreement for OVW grantees is not one of them. Thank you.
I believe for the OJP grantees, the one thing you'll need to be careful, I don't know for sure, obviously if a financial monitoring is done, then yes, there might be some sort of reconciliation. Also to pay attention on your final financial reconciliation, when you submit your final FFR, if you've gone over the amount that's being charged to indirect, you will be required to either pay that back or do basically a retroactive budget modification. So that's the biggest thing, is to make sure you're not going over on indirect. Because that's where they're going to look and make sure that you're not overcharging that. In general, I think it's probably a good idea to contact your program manager if your indirect cost rate agreement, especially if your rate changes.
Yes. What Dara just said, I would agree for purpose area 1. Just any changes, just contact your grant program specialist.
Great, thank you, everyone. And do any of our presenters or panelists have any tips or information they would like to share regarding this year's application process?
We encourage you to submit your application when ready, but sooner rather than later. It's already February 6th, and in a couple weeks, or less than a couple weeks, we're going to be wrapping it up. So please take your time, but also please don't wait until the last day or so to submit because of technological issues or just undue stress. So try to submit when you can, sooner rather than later. As Christina mentioned, there is next week a OVW webinar, but I just wanted to let you all know that there's one last one, which is sort of like a wrap-up, which includes the application checklist and a final question and answer session, and that's on February 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But yes, please call the response center at 1-800-421-6770 or email at tribalgrants@usdoj.gov. As you go about applying, if you have any questions, we're here.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Angela, do you have any additional comments you would like to share?
I just want to say before you submit your budgets, please make sure you're reviewing them and make sure you haven't left anything off. If we do receive your budgets and we start reviewing them and we have questions, we do ask that you do respond on a timely basis so we can get your budgets approved and get your funding back out to you.
Great, thank you, Angela. And we do have one additional question that came in, and that is, when is the last day that you will take questions from applicants?
We can take questions from applicants until 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on February 25th. But again, even after that, you can call with your late application questions the next day at the response center. But we're going to have staff standing by until 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, February 25th.
Excellent. Thank you, Melissa. And Suhaila, did you have any additional comments you would like to share?
Thanks, Christina. I was just thinking about some of the things that I have seen recently in budgets, and really it's if you could try to just make it as easy to read as possible. So if you have multiple line items in the budget, in the worksheet portion, and since you have a corresponding narrative to each one, to just make it clear, where one narrative for a line item starts and the next begins, so that it doesn't all run into each other, so we can identify and clearly go through easily through each of the line items and verify that everything does have a corresponding narrative. Also, and I went through a couple of these during the presentation as well, but some of the, I see a lot where there is food for conferences or meetings, or like CCR meetings or outreach events, and food is not allowable during those types of activities. Our OVW program has very limited circumstances under which food is allowable. And that, again, like I mentioned before, is when you are directly serving victims. And a scenario that would be allowable, it would be for like a healing circle or group support or emergency assistance, those types of things. So just make it very clear in the budget. And a perspective to take when you're creating your budget is that we have to verify that all costs are reasonable when you provide additional information so that we can determine if something's reasonable or not. That's very helpful so that we don't have to go back later on and ask. So for example, if you have some outreach items and you want to purchase maybe some pens or pins and magnets or something that you can hand out at a conference, if you have like a booth and want to get your information out there, then that's fine. Those are allowable types of costs. You would just want to include maybe examples of those costs, of what you would want to include, and the cost per item, just so that we can have an idea. Are you looking at purchasing a $5 pen or, a pack of 12 with your name on it for, that same cost? So something that's just like an example, but just so that we can determine if the cost that or the item that you're looking at, if the cost is reasonable or not. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Suhaila. And Jeroma, did you have additional information you would like to share?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeroma. Julius and Dara, did you have any additional information you would like to share?
I think just to reiterate what Melissa said about starting your application early, and contacting us if you have any questions.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.